Steven Spielberg once told a film student about who wanted to ask like, how do you make a movie? He answered like really simply, he's like, go make a movie. And like, that's like the advice people always ask, like, how do I get started in something like this? And it's like, just go, like, sort it out, like, figure it out, ask questions. And like, put aside the nervousness and the fear of failing or disappointing somebody, or because you're certainly going to do those things. Like, it's not that you're not going to fail or disappoint people. You are 100% going to fail and disappoint people. And like, learning that that's like okay, I think is probably one of the biggest. It's like the easiest way to become invincible.
Welcome to another episode of Let's Give a Damn, the podcast that inspires and equips you to give more damns than ever before. We bring you amazing stories of people from all walks of life who saw something wrong and gave a damn about it. I'm your host, Nick Lapara, and I'm beyond thrilled to bring you today's conversation. Ian Rosenberger was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His life and career took him all over the world, experiencing new things all the time and meeting the most amazing people. One of those places he began to visit frequently was the country of Haiti. As a result of a trip he took right after the 2010 earthquake, which claimed the lives of over 250,000 Haitians, he started two organizations, Thread and Team Tossie. Team Tossie is now known as Work, so Thread and Work. I don't want to give away too much about what Thread and Work do, but I can tell you, buckle up and be prepared to be blown away. These are great organizations. Ian is a truly exceptional leader running these organizations that are changing the world in so many tangible ways. They are damn givers through and through. Toward the end of our conversation, you'll hear me state that this podcast would release on September 18. Obviously, it's not September 18. We wanted to give you more time to get to know them and to check out a Kickstarter they are currently running for a new backpack they have made from 100% recycled canvas, which was made entirely from discarded plastic bottles. I got my hands on one of these bags, and let me tell you, they're fantastic. Super functional, they look great. They made a truly exceptional bag, and you're gonna wanna stick around all the way to the end because I have details at the end of this podcast. Thread has generously donated one bag for me to give to one of you. That's right, one of you will get your hands on this bag valued at almost $200. It's a beauty. You're gonna wanna take this bag everywhere like I do now. But first, let's hear more about Ian's life, his heart, his passion, and his vision for a better world. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Ian Rosenberger. It's my pleasure to have Ian Rosenberger on the line. Ian, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Nick?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today. We have so much to talk about. I'm pumped to learn more about you and about the work you're doing. So shall we get into it?
We shall. Let's give a damn.
Wonderful. I love it. Before we get into all of the amazing work that you're doing and the projects you're involved in, let's learn a little bit about you, because I hope that we'll get a little bit of a peek and maybe some hints into why you turned out the way that you are and why you're doing the work that you're doing. So take us back as far as you want to go, but just give us kind of a quick overview of the people, places, and things that shaped you into who you are today.
Yeah, right on. I mean, the quick and dirty is I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I tell my team all the time, and anybody who will listen, that I'm old enough to remember the steel mills closing, but young enough not to give a damn.
There you go.
Grew up here in the city, and my dad, started his own business, and my grandfather worked in the mills. My great grandfather worked in the mills. So in Pittsburgh, we call that a mill hunky. I'm a mill hunky all the way through, and grew up in one of those little steel towns that has had such a tough time over the past 20 years or so. But understood what going to work for a living means, and spent a lot of time traveling and all over the world. Got the chance to spend some time doing a reality TV show in my early 20s, and through that was introduced to a really good friend that took me to Africa in 2006, 2007, and had my world opened up in Africa and Zambia. Understood for the first time what it was like for people to be poor and could empathize with poverty, and then that led down a road that became a real life changer for me.
Amazing. So a couple questions here. One is this reality show that you quickly glossed over. Is it one that we would all know about? Were you a bachelor, Ian?
No, I'm not good looking enough to be a bachelor. I was actually on Survivor.
Oh, nice.
And it was early in the Survivor process. I say all the time I try to spend the rest of my life since Survivor trying to get my it pushed to the second page of my Google search.
There you go. Well, keep working at it. It'll happen. And then you said you spent time in Zambia. I spent, what year were you there? Did you say 2006?
2006, 2007, yeah.
I was in Zambia in 2006.
Really?
For like 6 or 7 weeks, way out in the bush.
Oh.
Spent some time with friends out there. I went with a group that was there for 2 weeks, and then I stayed for another 4 or 5. Loved it.
Cool.
Like I just was just living and loving it, and the people are amazing, and just spent a lot of time with great people for weeks on end. It was a beautiful experience, and
it's an incredible country.
Yeah, it really is. The people are second to none, and learned a lot. I mean, I've been involved in humanitarian social impact work from the age of 13, so 21 years now. But those few weeks in Zambia taught me so much. Like, it was a crash course in, we could probably talk a little bit about this, but in what people in countries like Zambia need from us and what they don't. The place that we have in those types of countries, right? And the place that we don't have,
Sure.
we sometimes go over with this, this savior complex. We're going to go over there and save and fix and put into place things that, and they don't need that. They don't need, we can sure come alongside and assist them. But anyway, all that to say is, like, I learned a ton from my time in Zambia. Who knows? Maybe we waved at each other while we were there.
I know, seriously. Well, we'd probably both stick out like a sore thumb.
Yes.
But I think you're hitting it right on the head. I mean, I spent the bulk of my time in a slum in Lusaka called Chiwama. And I thought I had understood what it meant to be poor for up until that point. But got the chance to just get to know people and realized that I really, really enjoyed working with people there. I wasn't sure exactly how to do it and do it well, but it just led to more conversations, more trips, and I was really guided by a really good friend of mine who started an organization in Africa, across 12 countries in Africa, called Grassroots Soccer. At the time, he was a professional soccer player in Zimbabwe. He saw a bunch of his friends die because of AIDS, and just decided to start a nonprofit that would help use soccer leagues to teach kids about AIDS prevention. And that grew and grew and grew. And, he's just a guy I look up to in my life. And it became one of those things where it's like, I want to do something like this, but I wasn't sure how. And after the show, I was working in television as a producer for MTV, and I worked as a photographer and a videographer. And in 2010, I was working for a marketing agency here in Pittsburgh. And after work one day, I was playing dodgeball with a bunch of friends, 28 at the time. And we'd won. It was the only match of the year that we'd won. And we went to a bar to celebrate. And Anderson Cooper comes on the TV and says that an earthquake had struck Haiti and killed, they think, around 300,000 people. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, what a shame. And like everybody, whenever things like this happen, we just feel bad. Yeah. And that night I went home and I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, what a shame is the best you can do.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So I'd been looking for, I think it was these moments that come across in life where you feel like, okay, like this is a moment that I'm supposed to do something. And I did exactly what I tell people not to do now. I went immediately after the disaster. I took a bunch of pictures.
Yep.
The idea was I was going to sell the photos to raise money for some nonprofit. And in the process, learned that places like Haiti are a mess. And it's not because of the people that are there. It's because of the people that come and visit and bring a whole host of issues around NGOs and businesses that make it very difficult for people who are born in those places to move upward.
Yeah, that's beautiful. 2010, I don't think you're wrong for, going. Like, a lot of people went, and I think that was super helpful. I reacted similarly, and right before we were about to buy plane tickets to go. I was involved in a lot of humanitarian work. We were about to get on. We actually had a plane that we were going to go on. It wasn't like a airline, with a group of people going, and we decided not to, and put together a benefit concert instead and raised $25,000. But I think we all have our path, but if you maybe and maybe you can maybe this will lead you into this next phase of the story. If you wouldn't have gone and seen things firsthand, maybe you wouldn't have gone on to start, to launch Thread and Team Tassie, which is now Work. And would you mind getting into that now? Like, tell us about, so 2010, you go over there, not really a plan in mind, take pictures, give it to some nonprofit. What did you see? What did you experience that caused you to say, okay, I need to go beyond, I already went beyond, that's a shame, and I'm here trying to do something. But now I need to go one step further, because that whatever happened in that season of your life really changed the trajectory of, your life for a long time to come, right?
It 100% did. And like, you're definitely kind of barking up the right tree. It's funny, like that week there was extraordinary. I learned a lot. Everybody kept telling me, oh, you won't come back. Oh, you won't come back. Nobody comes back. And I kind of took it as a dare. So I came home, and, it was immediately apparent that like what I'd experienced in Haiti was so jarring to the way that I lived in Pittsburgh. And that, it was very easy to all of a sudden feel like you didn't really have a home in either place, because, Haiti's so close to the U.S. It's this largest economy in the world, right? Neighboring the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And you're very aware at all times of your privilege, and for the first time in my life, I became very aware of both the fact that I was white, and also the fact that I was rich, at least by Haitian standards.
Yeah.
And those two things were really jarring concepts. So to come in face to face in a very real way as a young man, with both privilege and race, and how those two interplay was something that was difficult. But I on that first trip, when I came home, I was looking at pictures, and you see the same two things in every picture I'd taken. You saw like this immense amount of poverty, and this immense amount of trash in the background of literally every single picture. There was just trash everywhere. And it was on my second trip. There was this guy that I started to get to know. His name is Tassi. And when I met him, had this enormous tumor on his face. Turns out there was a tumor growing out of his jaw that was slowly killing him. And for no other reason than I think he saw like a guy that might be able to help him out. He took me aside on that second trip, and he asked me directly for help. And I swear to God, it wasn't, and there was nothing altruistic about it. Like, it wasn't like I was like, you know what, I'm going to save this guy.
Sure.
Like, that was it was just like you're confronted very directly by a person, like looking you at the eye and asking you for help. It was like, didn't really feel like I had much of a choice. If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I came home. I figured out that I could sell those pictures that I'd taken for some cash. My friends and I raised about $50,000. We got him a surgery. I found a doctor in Pittsburgh that would do a surgery. For all intents and purposes, smuggled him into the United States. Like,
wow.
Got him a kind of a trumped up visa to get him into the U.S. And that's really funny to say trumped up these days. But got him, a visa to get into the U.S. and we got him a surgery that took his jaw out. Essentially, he completely rolled his face back, took his jaw out, and replaced it with a bone from his leg. And the doctors created a new jaw. And he lived with me and my roommate and my Basset Hound dog for 12 weeks. And it's those 12 weeks that completely changed my life. But it wasn't until after the whole thing was over, we took Tas back into Haiti, where he's from. And we like the experience was, by my account, finished. We brought him back into the neighborhood that he lived in, Cité Soleil, which is one of the poorest neighborhoods in the Western Hemisphere. And frankly, like, that's the moment where I realized that this entire experience was this big kind of whites and shining armor experience. That, like, by just dropping Tassi off into the neighborhood that he was born, understanding that he was destined still to the same life that most guys his age were destined to, which is a pretty short life and a pretty violent death. So that, by helping him get the surgery didn't solve the problem. It just solved the symptom. And so that begged the question, like, well, what's the problem? Like, what does it mean for the poor not to need the rich anymore? Like, how do we help this kid all the way? First of all, that was a weird feeling. It's just like this whole exercise to that point had been pretty self-congratulatory. It'd been like, hey, look what we can do. And so I spent a year and a half trying to figure out what it meant for the poor not to need the rich anymore by asking the people that I was meeting in Haiti. I started going back and forth dozens and dozens of times. What I learned throughout that process was that it was something like, I think that was completely earth-shattering for me, but probably sounds pretty simple to you, which is that, like, I learned that the poor and the rich are not different. I learned that when you ask the folks that I was meeting in Haiti what it is they needed, they would tell you the same things that somebody in my hometown in Ambridge would tell you. It's that they just need a decent way to make a living and for their kids to have a better life than they had. And that was kind of a completely like thunder strike of a realization for me. It was like, from my entire life, I treated everybody that was poor as them and everybody that was rich as us. And it was just a realization that all those walls came tumbling down. And that was when it was like, oh, this is why NGOs and nonprofits don't necessarily always do a great job, because they're not solving for the actual issue, which is that people need good jobs. So then I decided that I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out how to get good people jobs and help all the people that have been coming to me since I met Toss.
That's beautiful, man. There's so much to talk about there, but I love how you just kind of wrapped up what you just shared by saying, it was then that I decided to spend the rest of my life helping good people find jobs, right? That's a beautiful thing. And we could talk, you and I, probably with the experiences we've had, we could talk forever on the sentence before that, where you said, this is why nonprofits and NGOs fail so often to actually address the real issues and, really bring in long-term solutions. It's all symptoms. It's all Band-Aids. I shouldn't say all, but it's primarily symptoms and Band-Aids. And let's stop the gushing blood. But then what? How do we actually fix this long-term? So based on what you just said, what did you go on to do? What does that look like? I mean, I know, but for people here listening, like, what did you go on to do? To talk about the work that you then went on to do, and let's talk impact. Let's talk what you're creating, all of those things.
Yeah, sure. Well, and I think I'll touch briefly on the nonprofit thing because I think it's important, is that, you're right. Like, throughout this process, over these 1.5, 2 years of just, hundreds now of trips to Haiti, you just observe a lot. And it's not that nonprofits don't have a purpose. Of course they have a purpose. They have a really critical purpose. And a lot of times that purpose is to do something very specific, and particularly after big disasters. I can't overestimate the value of NGOs and government after big disasters. That said, like, I think you hit it on the head, like the symptoms versus source. And I came by this honestly. It was really, truly my ignorance that led me down the path of understanding and developing this philosophy. I started reading everything I can get my hands on people who I came across that working with the poor. And it really settled into like 3 people that I started to develop a philosophy around. I was reading a ton by a guy named Paul Farmer, who started an organization in Haiti called Partners in Health that spread to other countries throughout the world. And Paul essentially pulled his philosophy from the liberation theology of the Central America in the 80s. Not to get too like esoteric, but Paul believes in the accompaniment, essentially the walking alongside the poor, as opposed to leading them or pushing them. And I thought that was just really critical. There's a second guy who worked in New York City, of all places, in Harlem, and worked in a 64 square block area. His name's Jeffrey Canada, and he created an organization called the Harlem Children's Zone. And Jeffrey believes in like a geographical boundary to know. So essentially saying, like, how do we decide who we serve? Well, if you live within this boundary, we're going to serve you. If you don't, we won't. Because I think having a boundary to say no is really important. And then the third was this guy right here in Pittsburgh, who started a really incredible organization called the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild. This guy, Bill Strickland. And Bill, saw the need for jobs in a neighborhood, and rather than train people for jobs, decided to start placing people into jobs, and has had this really magnificent run of 100% graduation rates in both training and placing the poor in the job. So if you take these three things, accompaniment and geographic location and jobs placement, that was kind of the three legs of the stool for me that became my philosophy around poverty, and understanding that I believe that poverty is a disease like AIDS or Ebola, or that ending it is possible by the time that you and I have grandchildren. And in fact, we're on our way to doing it. I think it's often overlooked, but we've halved the rates of global poverty in the past 30 years. And that the immunization to that disease, the cure, is a good, dignified job. The problem with nonprofits is that as well-meaning in many cases they are, is they're not suited both infrastructurally and for the many times the training of the people that are working in it to be businesses. They're not trained to create jobs. They're trained to solve for issues. And so I don't think the orientation of the NGO, it's not the fault of the NGO, it's just the orientation of the organization is not structured to do the thing that people actually need to end poverty. So, and the reason for that, which is so fascinating to me, is that the vast majority of nonprofits, the startup culture that exists in those communities, the funding comes in whether there's no penalty for being inefficient. So I got really excited about the fact that what if we could create these jobs? What if we could place people into jobs in Haiti? And that's when I came up against one of the biggest stumbling blocks, which is one of the other big reasons that nonprofits don't do this, is that the unemployment rates in the countries that we're working in are 60, 70, in some neighborhoods 80%. And it's like, how can you expect an NGO to place a person into a job if there's just no jobs available and the NGO isn't trained to create them? So that's when it was like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, we need to create jobs. We need to figure out a way, an engine to create jobs. And I went back to those photos, and I saw all the trash, and it was like, well, what if we could figure out a way to get up all this trash up off the ground? And that's where, the philosophy around poverty gave way to this organization that's now called Work, that used to be called Team Tasi. And then the solve for placing the poor into jobs became Thread. And so, necessity being the mother of invention, Thread was just a solve to try to get as many of my friends working again as possible.
So how do Work and Thread work together, essentially? How do they feed into each other? What does that work ecosystem look like?
So we work within a single geographical area in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. It's called Menelas, and it includes, but is not limited to, the neighborhood of the landfill community in Haiti. So it's probably about 10,000 people overall. And the philosophy is we can place the heads of household of each family in Menelas into a job that we can effectively help the people that live there end poverty for themselves. So that became a very clear goal. It's how do we place the heads of each household in this community into jobs? And as Thread became a thing, we started researching, okay, well, we can turn this plastic trash into fabric. That's awesome. I literally Googled what you could turn trash into and realized that fabric was an end product. And it was if we can create beautiful products at scale, not just artisanal or blah, 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 but really truly, I wanted to be serving $1 billion plus companies at scale, then we could put, say, 1,000 people to work here. And literally, it became that Work became the instrument of programming that prepares a person for a job, and Thread became the instrument of placement.
Got it.
That continues a job. If you think of poverty as a whole, any person that's poor, especially in absolute terms, living on less than $1 or $2 a day, the hole they're in is dug by lack of access to healthcare, education, being banked, and being in a home. And if you're able, Work does the hard work of helping get that person healthy in school, their family healthy, under roof, etc. And then at the end of that process, when they're ready to graduate, then Thread comes in and then gives them a job.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Ian. I love how thorough this process is, right? You could have done one or the other, and you did both. For which maybe sometimes you're like, why the hell did I get into this? I'm sure it's
every day.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a shit ton of work. But in a place where it's 60 and 70 and sometimes 80% unemployment, it's so smart and wise and all of those things to not only provide jobs, but to prepare people for those jobs, because it's a place that needs both of those things to make it work, I think. And I don't know that I've ever, maybe I'm just missing it, but I don't see what you just described happening in a lot of places. It's one or the other. Primarily, there might be the jobs there, but not preparing them for it and really, getting them ready for it and acclimating them to what's coming.
Right.
So that's really beautiful, man. That's really beautiful.
Well, again, first of all, I appreciate you saying that. But second of all, it was just one thing leads to another.
Right.
It's like you say yes, and then you say yes again. You say yes, and then it's like, okay, well, the toothpaste is out of the tube. I've seen this now.
Yep.
I know you interviewed Chelsea Clinton for your podcast, and one of the things I find fascinating about her is that she's had this extraordinary life, and she has somehow figured out a way to be a really normal,
yes,
very kind and really driven person. And she talks about Haiti a lot and has seen it firsthand. And it's this concept of pairing NGOs with business is not new, but somehow we haven't gravitated to it as a global community in the way that we need to, in the kind of jumping with both feet way. This idea of really jumping in and saying, we're going to pair nonprofit goals with for-profit ends is to me holds the key, especially if the business is angled and dedicated towards those same social impact goals. So, Thread is a benefit corporation. We're a B Corp, and
yep.
we hold ourselves responsible to our environmental and our social bottom line in addition to making money.
So you used to, most of Thread's existence was partnering with bigger brands, correct?
That's right.
Who were some of those brands?
We started making fabric, and we made fabric, and we sold it to big brands like Timberland and Marmot and Reebok. American Eagle is not one of our clients. So we spent 4 years just trying to figure out how to find really big brand partners. Like I said, I wanted scale. So the best way I knew how to do that was to go to somebody that was making millions of a thing as opposed to tens of a thing. It was a good business. The business grew. We doubled in size every year for 3 years. And we got to a place where we said, we have a network now of people in Haiti and now in Honduras and in Taiwan. The network's about 2,000 people who are earning income from picking up, collecting, and processing plastic bottles. And then so they can be turned into fabric and then eventually finished products. We offer a host of programming services that make sure that the people that we serve have access to capital and business practices that are going to make their lives better. And then we just recently got to a place where we made a decision to branch out and start to make our own products. Because while it's awesome to see big brands, doing one or two things or having one or two products that are recycled, I just don't feel like the old retail brands are doing enough and telling the story in a way that we felt could be told better. So we decided to branch off and start making our own products.
I actually have one of those products sitting right in front of me, which I just started using. I'm very excited about it. This bag, Ian, I'm a backpack junkie. You name it and I've owned it. I love backpacks. I use them for everything. And I have one, and I've got to say, my wife walked out the door 45 minutes ago. And I was like, I really love this bag. I really love it. Everything about it just makes sense. And we're going to definitely, in the show notes and before and after and a lot in the next few days, I want to push this bag because I think I want people to have it. Because it's a bag that works. If anything, even if they don't buy it, I want to give you props for the great video that you guys used for the Kickstarter. I chuckled my way through that. I thought it was just super, super well done. But I do love what this bag represents. I love the heart and soul that's into it. More and more, my family and I are transitioning to buying only products that mean something, that where we can trace it back, right? That's so important for us to get to the point. We do a lot of that with our food already, where it's so important for us to know. I just had a conversation yesterday, a podcast conversation with Tunde Wei, a Nigerian chef who uses food and meals around a table to exploit injustices. And we were just talking about how it's so important to, like, America in this kind of modern Western culture, we don't ask those questions anymore. We see food in front of us and we're like, oh, that looks good, I'll eat it. Instead of like knowing, how did it get here? Like, do you even care about that? And I think it's the same with our clothes and our backpacks and things like that. It's so important for us to have that connection, because then that product or that food or what that backpack means so much more, right?
I completely agree with you. Yeah. And I think you hit a really interesting trend, which is that generally what happens in food happens in retail 10 years later. So, we saw this movement to farm to table. Yep. We saw locally made, we saw organic. And now we're seeing this thing happen in clothing around that same idea. It was interesting, like when we decided to make backpacks, I love that you love the bag. That's great. Yes, we're making backpacks. We're going to become an essentials company. So we believe in the same thing we've always believed, which is a good day's, dignified day's work is what matters to people, whether you live in Port-au-Prince or Pittsburgh or anywhere in between. So, we wanted to create items for the work week. We wanted to create items that help make people's day, Monday through Fridays, easier. And the backpack for me was something close to my heart. I also love backpacks. But more than that, there's a Creole saying called "sac vide pas camper." What it means is an empty bag cannot stand. And I just love the sentiment behind that we're nothing without the community that fills us up, without the people around us to fill us up with good or bad things. So like I had some like hacky sack granola reasons because I'm that kind of guy. But also like as we started to make a product, it was like, well, let's not just make a bag people can throw their shit in. Let's make something that's actually useful for their workday. Like we need to make this product good enough for people to actually want, because they're not going to buy a product just because it has this good story. It has to be a product that works for them first. And then, okay, if it has this great story, then that's going to keep them and make them a customer for life. But it was really important to us to make a product that worked, which is why we have like the double handles on it, and we have the wine bottle pouch and all the other stuff that, the goodies inside.
I will definitely be using the wine bottle pouch for sure. Ian, give us some numbers here, because I know people are probably, I know at least I am wondering, one of the questions I have is, okay, what's the impact been though? Like in terms of, everything from, people that now have jobs or have had jobs in the last few years because of the work that you're doing and creating, or how many plastic bottles, all of that. Like what is kind of the breadth, the scope of thread and work and all of that?
So we just picked up our 44 millionth plastic bottle.
Wow.
We do that across 3 countries in what we call the first mile of supply chain. So we work in Haiti and Honduras and Taiwan. We partner with local organizations as well as have our own field staff on the ground. And we do a ton of different programming that we hope increases outcomes, positive outcomes for families. So business trainings, disaster insurance, low or no interest loans. So access to capital helps people's businesses grow. The network right now employs a little over 2,000 people on a day-to-day basis and keeps them employed. The bag program, we just launched a Kickstarter for the bag program that'll go until September 19th. And we just passed, for this particular program, 60,000 bottles picked up. So the bags themselves are made of 100% recycled bottle canvas, first mile canvas. And this is the first of what we hope are tens and tens and tens of thousands of bags sold. Each bag removes 25 plastic bottles from landfills and waterways, particularly from communities where these are problems anyway. Keep in mind that like the recycling industry is already quite strong. Most bottles are picked up from post-industrial waste, but we pick up post-consumer bottles that are destined for landfills of the ocean. So we're pretty proud of the impact so far. We've got a long way to go, and we are definitely not perfect. But we believe that it's this type of business that can actually make a difference for people.
Yeah, absolutely. 3 countries, 2,000 people employed, tens of millions of bottles. I'd say again, obviously no organization is perfect. You're not perfect. Nobody thinks that or believes that, but you're doing what you can, right? And I think from what I can tell, you're doing a hell of a job. at it. So
I appreciate it. We're in the trenches. I feel like maybe 10 years from now, we'll be able to look back and say, okay, we did it right.
as we begin to wrap up our conversation, a few questions left. The Let's Give a Damn family, those listening to this conversation, this podcast episode, they want to make a difference. They are making a difference, or they're on the verge. A lot of people, are just finding this show on a weekly basis, and they're interested in giving a damn, and they're interested in helping and loving and serving other people. Can you give, based on your experiences, based on your life, it seems like you and I have, had kind of similar trajectories actually in a lot of different ways. So you've seen a lot, you've done a lot, you've experienced, felt a lot. What is some kind of general advice or wisdom that you can share for those that have not yet jumped out of the ship, as it were, jumped out of the nest and said, I am going to do my part? What advice would you have for them to just get going? What's just some simple practical things they can do?
For sure. It's funny. I get this question a lot, and the answer I always give is actually I got advice from a very unlikely source, and this person didn't give it to me specifically. They just they said it, and I read it someplace. Steven Spielberg once told a film student about who wanted to ask how do you make a movie? And he answered really simply, he's like, go make a movie.
I love it.
And that's the advice people always ask, how do I get started in something like this? And it's just go, sort it out, figure it out, ask questions. And put aside the nervousness and the fear of failing or disappointing somebody, or because you're certainly going to do those things. It's not that you're not going to fail or disappoint people. You are 100% going to fail and disappoint people. And learning that that's okay, I think is probably one of the biggest. It's the easiest way to become invincible. Once you no longer fear failure, then those are the moments when I think you have the biggest shot of actually making a difference. So my advice to people all the time is see the problem, solve the problem. Don't wait for the perfect situation to come along, because it never will.
Yeah, because it doesn't sound like there was too much in your story. It doesn't sound like there was too much of you asking for permission.
Yeah.
It was you, messing up along the way, and, maybe doing some things but that's all the learning process, but you went out and did it. You can't figure out how you mess things up unless you're actually doing something, right? You're not gonna fix problems watching Netflix every night, or just not doing it.
Yeah. Although I will say sometimes it's really nice to sit down and watch some Netflix.
Of course. Of course.
But yeah, you're totally right.
I rag on, Netflix. My wife and I watch a movie every once in a while. I don't watch a lot of TV, but it is, yes, totally. I don't mean to, I really do call out Netflix probably too much, because it is a nice resource for us. But the point is, a lot of people, they resort to that way too often, right? It's their go-to versus and they see things that need to be done, and they're not doing it because they don't know what that first step is, instead of just stepping out and trusting that they'll figure out the steps as they go, right?
I think that's right. I think you just have to be comfortable knowing that you don't know what, you have to be okay not knowing where the path's going to lead. And I think a lot of people have this vision of their mind of what it's going to be, and that leads them to not do certain things. And I think that that's where people do themselves a really big disservice, because saying yes is probably the most powerful tool that you can have in your toolbox. It's just okay, let's go.
Yeah, let's do it. 100 years from now, when you die, because hopefully you'll live a long and prosperous and happy life, all these people, these amazing humans that you've helped throughout your life are there in this big room, your family, your friends, the 2,000 plus, hopefully it's 200,000 people at that point that have been, that have careers and jobs through Thread and work and all of that. The bottom line is there's a room full of people that are present to honor and mourn your life. And in this hypothetical scenario, because it hasn't happened yet, I've been asked to give your eulogy. As I stand up there in front of the people that you love and cherish the most, and the people that cherish and love you the most, what do you hope that I would say about your life and legacy on that day?
Oh, geez. You're hitting at probably the core of one of my biggest fears.
Yeah.
Is the fear of the funeral. Two things came to mind. He worked hard, and I had a camp counselor when I was a kid. Actually, when I was a camp counselor freshman year of college, and I had a fellow, the camp director. He said the number one thing you can do to be useful in somebody else's life is to give a damn. And I guess, really fitting for this podcast, but like,
Yes.
just give a shit, just care. And if I had to like sum it all up, and one day, hopefully along with time from now, is, they could keep it very, very short because I'm very long-winded. I could say he worked hard and he gave a damn.
I love it. That's a great life and legacy, man.
I hope so. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, unless you do some really like weird stuff between now and then, you're well on your way of accomplishing that. So
thank you.
Yeah, this podcast will release on September 18, which is a day before. You said the Kickstarter is on the 19th. So people are listening to this 30 hours before the Kickstarter is over, and we'll do some social media promo and all that. I appreciate that. I mean, it's already doing very well, but we want to get as many people on board. So what do you want people to go look for related to the Kickstarter or not related to the Kickstarter as we wrap up this convo? What do you want them to go look for?
The best place to go and find out more about the bag is to go to www.abetterbackpack.com. And you can follow us on our social handles. It's at Thread INTL, Thread International, Thread INTL, and that's across Insta and Twitter and everywhere else. But yeah, and please, if you're listening, just check out the bag. Our goal is to get to $700,000, and that'll be about 100,000 bottles picked up and throughout the campaign. And we're really looking forward to sharing the bag and lots more products like it with people. So that's the place to go.
I love it. It's wonderful. So Thread INTL on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, abetterbackpack.com. I'll have all of these links and so on in the show notes. Ian, this was a super, super pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Dearest Damn Givers, thank you so much for joining me for another inspiring conversation with an incredible human being. Ian and I are both grateful that you listened to us chat for a few minutes. As I stated in the intro, we are going to be giving away one of the Thread backpacks that they are currently kickstarting. This bag is incredible and you're going to want one. So follow us on @Let'sGiveADamn because later on this week, we're going to launch that giveaway. But only one of you will win this bag, so I'd recommend you all back this project on Kickstarter to ensure you get 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 at the Kickstarter discounted rate. Go to abetterbackpack.com. That's abetterbackpack.com to learn more about this amazing product. Follow Ian on Twitter @Ian Rosenberger and follow Thread on Twitter and all the social media platforms @Thread INTL. Thread INTL. That's short, obviously, for Thread International. Per usual, show notes for this conversation and all the others can be found by visiting podcast.letsgiveadamn.com. Podcast.letsgiveadamn.com. This podcast was created by me and edited by the amazing Chad Snavely. We have an incredible conversation coming at you next week. We're going to get weird with CJ Cassiata. You won't want to miss that one. I love you very much. See you next week.